minute and then we're going to start up. We will be recording this session today for folks. So obviously those additional people that are not here today for whatever reason, they'll be able to tune in and catch up on what Lori's going to share with us today on an educator from Unit 23, Lori George. Lori is our extension educator for Small Farms Local Foods and very experienced gardener. And she's going to share with us today the topic of cool season vegetables. And then towards the end of the session, we're going to have one of our master gardeners come on, and she is going to talk about harvesting. So many of us grow vegetables, and there's so many people that are new to gardening, and we do have a lot of new gardeners with the pandemic last year, a lot of new startups, and then people don't know when to harvest, the best time to harvest. And so Diane Langenhorst, a Unit 23, which is out of Breeze, Illinois, and she lives in Bartelzo, Illinois. So she's going to be joining us to share some of that information. So with that said, I'll turn over the program to Lori, and thank you, Lori, for helping us today.
Thank you, Gail. I appreciate the introduction, and I am anxious and excited to work with Diane as well. So we have a lot of good information today. I will be touching on cool season gardening, specifics and basics on cool season because it's springtime. Even though it's spring, when we start talking about cool season garden, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be just for spring. The information that I'm going to present today can also be used in the fall for your fall cool season gardening as well. So today I'm going to talk about several things. We'll talk about soil health, spring cleaning, seeding and transplants, cool weather crops, and crop protection, and how to take care of those crops when we get colder weather like we've had so far. So basically, what is soil? According to the Soil Science Society of America, it is the unconsolidated mineral or organic material on the immediate surface of the earth, and it can serve as a natural medium for the growth of land plants. Basically, it's a living, breathing, natural entity. It's comprised of about 45% solids, such as the minerals, 20 to 30% water, and about 20 to 30% of gases, and about 2 to 5% organic matter. These percentages can vary, but the ideal percentages are 50% solids, such as the minerals and organic matter, and 50% pore spaces, which are going to be filled with air and water. Soil has 5 major functions. It provides a habitat for the microorganisms, such as the earthworms and the microbes, that can assist with the decomposition processes. It recycles waste products and filters water as it moves through the soil profile. It serves as an engineering material, and it provides a medium for plant growth. Soil consists of horizons near the Earth's surface that have been altered over time. The upper limit of the soil horizons, such as the humus, the topsoil, and the subsoil, as you see in the pictures, are the boundaries between soil and air, shallow water, live plants, or plant materials that have not started the decomposition process. These areas have been altered by the interactions of climate, organisms, and topography, such as erosion over time. The lower horizons that separate soil from the non-soil underneath, such as the weathered rock fragments and bedrock, are the most difficult to define. The weathered rock fragments are a mix of the deposits from the natural bedrock underneath and the minerals that have leached down from the humus, topsoils, and subsoils from the top. The bedrock is a massive rock such as volcanic rock, quartz, limestone, sandstone that lays under the surface materials and are considered the parent material, or the material from which the above soil was formed from. When the parent materials start to break down, the soil then becomes a mixture of different soil types and textures, such as sand, silt, and clay. Sand is going to be the larger particle size. It has a lot of air spaces, and because of this, the soil and the nutrients can drain quickly. Sandy soils warm up quickly in the spring. This can be a concern that since water drains away quickly, nutrients can be leached outside of the plant's root zones quicker than soils that have a clay base. The clay soils, clay is basically essential to your soil. It has a negative charge, and because of this, it is naturally high in nutrients. And it can also hold moisture, sometimes too much moisture. We can see that with standing water in our garden areas. This will result in the soil water draining slowly. Soils high in clay can lengthen the time for the soil to warm up in the spring. Clay also has smaller air spaces, which can hinder plant growth as air is needed for a healthy root zone. Silt is a mixture of both clay and sand. Silt has medium-sized particles, so it can hold water and nutrients in the soil, but not long enough to cause problems like clay soil does. It can warm up quickly in the spring, but not as quickly as sand. The clay portion of silt has the ability to hold water for the roots, but not long enough to cause problems over time. There's a simple test that you can do to give you idea of proportions of sand, silt, and clay that are present in your garden soil. What you need to do is put about 2 inches of soil in a jar and then fill the jar with soil with water and then stir well. Let the jar sit for about 1 hour. The sand will fall to the bottom of the jar. The silt will fall just above the sand, and the clay will sit on top. These particles floating at the very top of the water that you see here are generally bits of floating organic matter. But after an hour, measure the depth of the sand, silt, and clay, and then estimate the approximate percentage portion of each one. Putting these percentages on a soil texture triangle will result in a central focus of what the type of soil is in your garden area. For this example, we have 45% of sand, which is going to be placed, clay, and silt. And once we put all of those together, it comes across as the intersection of all three lines as a loam soil. Loam has good water drainage and allows air to infiltrate the soil like sand, but it can still hold moisture, which is necessary for the growth of the plants. These soil triangles can be found on the internet if you're interested in looking for one for your own use. When we start looking at soil, we have to start defining what soil structure is. And so soil structure is going to be the arrangement of the clay, silt, and sand into stable aggregates or clumps. Very sandy soils have no structure because the sand grains don't cling together. Clay soils, because of the small particle size and their flat shape, can be tightly packed together and become very dense, which reduces the ability for the plant roots to penetrate. This also reduces the potential for erosion or sandy or loam soil based. Loamy soils, remember, are a mix of the two, which can create a soil that is loose and full of holes or soft and crumbly. They're easy to dig into and plant into, and they're easy to erode during irrigation events. These soils will absorb and hold water like a sponge, which is great for your plants. But if you have a nice loamy soil in the garden, incorporating cover crops over the winter months will help reduce the potential for erosion. Some of the indicators that you have, whether you have soil structure, whether it's good or poor, when you're looking at good soil structure, you want your plant roots to go deep. It has a nice, sweet, earthy smell when you pick it up and you smell it close to your nose. It has that nice, earthy smell to it. The water can drain quickly. If you dig a hole at the bottom, that water will drain quickly away. The soil is easy to dig. The topsoil is not compacted at all. You're going to have a lot of worm channels, which are going to be important when you start looking at your soil itself. And the top layers are soft and crumbly and friable when they're both wet and dry. If you have poor soil structure, your plants are going to have shallow roots, so they may not go as deep as what they should be. You may have an unpleasant smell. If you have poor soil structure, you may have standing water. And if that occurs, then you may start seeing or smelling some unpleasant odors, maybe like a rotten egg smell, which is not what you want. If you dig a hole, the water generally sits in the holes or on the surface, and you can see this after an irrigation event. Soil can be sticky or come into hard lumps or be very dry. There will be a very few earthworms within that structure. It can be compacted and the surface layer slumps or it can dry out to a crust, which will not allow any type of seeds, germinating seeds to penetrate so that they can start growing. This is just a handout that I found from the USDA Department of Agriculture, the NRCS office. This is if you're interested in learning a little bit more, this is a checklist for growers that gives you some good information as far as your soil health management and some of the things that you can start looking at as far as cover crops, how to use them in mulching, nutrient management, pest management. This is some really good information, especially if you are a beginning farmer. So when we start looking at healthy soils, you have to understand that soils are really alive. There's all sorts of microbes within the soils, such as the bacteria and protozoas and earthworms. So a single teaspoon of soil can hold up to 1 billion bacteria, 6 to 9 feet of fungal strands, several thousand protozoa, nematodes, and earthworms. The bacteria are the largest group, which feed on the organic matter and store and converts atmospheric nitrogen into a form that the plants can use. Fungi, such as mycorrhizal fungi, can form a relationship with plant roots and increase their ability to uptake nutrients from the soil. Protozoa can feed on bacteria, fungi, and algae. These guys release nitrogen back into the soil environment. Nematodes are simple microscopic worms, which are important for the nitrogen cycle. There are good nematodes, and then there are bad nematodes. And at last, there's going to be the earthworms. These are able to mix the soil particles through their movement in the soil. Their tunnels help aerate the soil and provide channels for plant growth and their roots to grow. The earthworm castings are a form of organic matter which is going to be beneficial to that healthy soil. Now, you can add fertilizers, and they can be added to the soil to help with the plant growth, but they don't help promote an environment that's generally necessary for any bacteria, fungi, or earthworms. Soils with more organic matter have more life within. Adding organic matter through mulching, compost, cover cropping, or having less disturbance to the soil surface through a no-till or low-till practices, all can create a healthy soil. So a basic soil test is going to be important to determine what your soil is like. And so you need to know where your soil stands as far as nutrients, soil pH, and organic matter, among other things. Soil samples can be taken any time during the year as long as the soil is not frozen or waterlogged. You need to evaluate your garden area. If you visually see soil differences, such as the color of the soil or the texture, maybe you have some drainage concerns in a certain area, or your topography shows that you have a slope in a certain area, then each distinct sub-area should be tested separately. If no differences are seen, then you're going to test the entire area as one. The number of samples taken will depend on the size of the area. Take the samples by selecting spots in a pattern that ensures that you're getting a representation of the whole area. Soil testing tools are great to use, such as the one at the bottom picture. If you do not have a soil testing tool, then you can use a hand trowel. Dig into the top 8 inches of soil. You're going to disregard the organic layer that you see on the top of the sample, but you're going to keep the rest. Take about 5 to about 20 samples, depending on the area to be tested, and then go ahead and mix them together in a box, a bag, a bucket, or whatever. And then you're going to obtain a final sample from that mix. You'll send the sample off to be analyzed. Soil testing labs can be found at the URL linked at the bottom of the slide. Most labs should return a report within about 2 weeks. If you request additional testing, such as heavy metals, the results may take longer to be returned. So what does the soil test look like? So the results are going to provide fertilization and or liming recommendations and application rates. So on this sample here, we have a sample ID, which was given by the client. So it tells specifically where the sample is from. The crop being grown. This will impact the lime recommendations. So when you submit the sample, make sure you tell them what type of a garden it's going to be, whether it's a vegetable garden or a flower garden or whatever type. You'll also get the test results that will show pH and nutrient levels that are found in the sample. So the pH is going to give you an optimum range, and generally you want about a 5.8, 6.5, maybe to a 7, depending on the crops that you're trying to grow. And we'll also give you phosphorus and potassium results. Nitrogen is not generally given on a soil sample result because nitrogen tends to be leached from the soil and it's very hard to determine. But you will get the phosphorus and potassium levels. And they should also give you lime and fertilizer recommendations based on your soil sample. So if you need to add some lime, they'll tell you how much, if your pH is low, and they'll also tell you how much and what type of fertilizer you need to get your garden going back up to where it should be. So you need to know the pH of your soil. That's going to be important. So if you have a soil pH that's anywhere from 0 to 4 or 5, that's going to be considered acidic soil. Anything that's an 8 or 9 all the way up to 14, that's going to be alkaline. The pH garden plants generally like to have a 6.3 to 7.3. So if you get a soil test back and it's too high, you can go ahead and incorporate the elemental sulfur to lower that pH. If the soil pH is too low, you can add crushed limestone to the soil. The finer the grind of the limestone and the elemental sulfur, the quicker it has the ability to be mixed in with the soil and change the soil pH over time. It's not going to be an overnight change that you're going to see. It's going to be a gradual change. So don't expect to go back out a week later and have the pH to the place where you need it. It does take time for that to break down with the weather. So why is it important to know the soil pH? Well, the soil pH is going to depend on what type of minerals are going to be available to the plant. So this is a typical soil pH nutrient scale that you see here. As you get to the lower 4.4 or 4.5, you'll notice that some of those nutrients, such as nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, they tend to be reduced and they're not available to the plants, even though it's in the soil and it's readily available there. Because the soil pH is too low, the plants cannot uptake it. Same thing if you go up to an alkalinity. If you have very strong or high pH in your soils, the nitrogen availability is going to be reduced. So basically what you're looking for is that nice sweet center point, which is about 6.3 to 7.3, where all the nitrogen, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, and all these minerals are going to be available to the plant. So knowing the pH of your soil is going to be very important. So let's talk a little bit about spring cleanup. And if you're anything like what I am, I generally use my tools and I throw them in the garage and I don't think about them until the next spring. Well, if that's the case, there are some things we need to start thinking about. First off, when you go back out into the garden, you need to really start pulling your weeds or any type of plants that have overwintered. Diseases and insects can overwinter on plant materials that are left over from the fall. So you want to be able to get any type of overwintering eggs or fungi or diseases or anything. So pull up all the material that's in the garden that you don't want saved and then get rid of it. Don't try and incorporate it into the soil because you're still going to have that problem. So you want to be able to pull it up and get it out of the garden. If your plants are diseased, throw them away, burn them, whatever. If you have any type of perennial weeds, you need to be able to try and get them up by the full root if possible. Because if any part of that root from the perennial weed remains in the garden, you'll still have problems with it next year. So you want to repair broken fences, garden beds, or anything that have been damaged due to the winter snows and winds that we've been having. If you didn't sharpen and clean your tools last fall, like me, then it should be done before going out and starting your spring garden. Clean off the dirt, water, detergent, steel wool, whatever's going to be best. And then use a solution, a bleach solution. A 10% bleach solution works best to help sanitize. The sanitation is going to help reduce any type of diseases that are on the shovel or the tool itself that may be transferred to the new plants for the spring and next growing season. You want to be able to oil all the moving parts, sharpen your blades, clean and sanitize those garden stakes, the pots, any plant supports that you have, such as the poles, like you see in the upper left-hand picture, anything that can hold the soil from the last year that may have been diseased, and try and use a sanitation process on that with that 10% bleach solution. Or any type of ornaments as well. So let's talk a little bit about seedling and the transplants. So depending on where you're at, this is the USDA plant hardiness zone map, and this is going to be important to know based on what zone you grow in. So here in Southern Illinois, we're generally about a 5 or 6, depending on where you're at. As you go further up north, you're going to hit the 4s and 3s and 2s. And these hardiness zone maps are going to be based on the temperature or the annual extreme minimum temperatures that you're going to see in your area. So it's over climate over time. And so knowing these is going to be important when you start finding any type of varieties or any type of plants that you want to grow. They generally tell you what zones they're going to be grown in. Here in Illinois, this is a website from the USDA Agriculture Research Service. And if I'm not from Illinois, you have the ability to pull up from whatever state you're from. But I pulled this one up for Illinois because it gives you a little bit closer idea as to where you're at, as to what your zone is. And then what I do next is go into the Illinois State Water Survey. And this survey is going to give you information as far as spring freeze and fall frost type dates. So what I did here was pull up the spring freeze for Illinois, which is the latest date of the last 32-degree Fahrenheit freeze temperatures. So based on your where you're at in the state, down in the Mount Vernon area, about April 28th or April 29th is going to be your basic last 32-degree freeze based on the climate over time. As you move further up, it's going to be a little bit later because you have colder temperatures. So these are some good resources that you can use. So when you're looking at seedling and transplants, there's a difference between cool season and warm season. So let me talk a little bit about the cool season itself. So cool season germination requires temperatures between 40 degrees Fahrenheit to about 90 degrees. So this is the seed germination itself. Above 90 degrees, the seeds generally will not germinate. It's just too hot. 80 degrees is the optimum temperature. This is important when you're starting your seedlings. Too cool of a soil temperature and the seeds will rot or seedlings will die off after germination. For the average day temperature, generally for growth, it's about 65 to 80 degrees during the day, 32 degrees for tender plants at night, and about 20 degrees for established plants. Cool season crops will flower when the temperatures go up, which can lead to bolting. Bolting is flowering of the plants. You see that sometimes with your carrots or with your radishes or lettuce. If you keep them in the garden too long, in the spring going into summer, they'll start to flower. And this can also make the produce bitter tasting. So that's another indication that it went out a little bit too long. Or it can lead to buttoning, where there's very little edible portions of the plant itself. The soil for cool season crops should be cool, right? Planting seeds may result in the seeds rotting, but planting transplants into cool soil will have a better chance of surviving. Mulch can be used when planting transplants, which will help promote cooler soil temperatures and will help to maintain the moisture during dry periods. For warm season plants, the use of black plastic can be incorporated into the garden area to help warm up the soil early in the spring, or to try and get a jump on the season when the plants are warming up for the season. Warm season crops require germination temps between 50 and 100, with optimum temperatures between 60 and 80. Growth and flowering for warm season depend on temperatures. So over 85, the plants are either shut down or not produce, or the flowers will abort. So that gives you a little bit of difference between cool season and starting for seeding and transplants in the warm season. So let's talk a little bit about some of the cool season crops that you can start this spring. There are hardy and semi-hardy cool season crops. The hardy cool season crops are the most tolerant. They can be planted 2 to 4 weeks before the average last frost date in the spring. Hardy cool season crops such as the broccoli and garlic, the peas, onions, and leeks, they can all tolerate air temperatures below 28 degrees Fahrenheit and heavy frost. The seeds will germinate in the cooler soil, and seedlings can survive the cooler soil temperatures. Semi-hardy plants can withstand air temperatures from about 28 degrees to about 32 degrees Fahrenheit and some light frost. If temperatures hit this range, some semi-hardy crops will die off, but the root can tolerate the lower temperatures. So the tops of the plants may turn a little bit black, they may turn brown, they may start drooping or die off, but it's generally the root crop or the lower part of the crop that you're looking to eat anyway. So they should tolerate those. Covering the row covers may benefit these semi-hardy plants, and I will discuss the use of row covers later in the presentation. If you're looking to find some vegetables to grow for your areas, the University of Illinois Extension has some really good updated information on vegetable varieties at the website that's listed here on the slide. They cover not only the cool season crops, but also the warm season crops. So, if you're interested in wanting to know what varieties do well in your area, check them out. This is a chart that's published by the Department of Vegetable Crops of the University of California, Davis. The URL of the slide of this chart is on the right side of the slide here. This indicates specific cool and warm season crops with temperature ranges for the minimum and maximum soil temperature requirements, temperature ranges where the plant grows best, and the days to germination after seeding. I've circled some of the cool season crops so you can see the differences in the temperature ranges between cool and warm season crops. The best way to determine the soil temperature for your garden is to invest in a soil temperature gauge, just as the one you see in the lower right-hand picture. There are many options in the marketplace today, and it would be a good investment for both beginning and experienced gardeners to have this. There are other resources out in the internet cloud spaces that you can access to determine when the best time to plant your crops. This example is from the Old Farmers Market, Old Farmers Almanac. The nice thing about this site is that you can enter your specific zip code or town, and a graph similar to what you see here will pop up with planting information. For this example, I chose Mount Vernon, Illinois, because that's basically where I'm from. The results will give you approximate dates of when to start the seeds indoors, when to sow the seeds outdoors, and when to harvest the crop. These dates are approximate as the climate can change from year to year based on where you live. But overall, it's a good start for beginning gardeners and maybe some advanced ones as well. Another resource will be your seedling packets. Seed packets should show the approximate dates of when to start the seeds, if you're growing indoors, how long until the seeds germinate, and approximately when to plant into the garden. The packets will also show you information on the maturity date for the crop. The maturity date will be the date of when the crop should be ready for harvest after seeding. Each crop is going to be different. There are crops that have different maturity dates. For example, you may want to grow, let's say, lettuce. There are some lettuce varieties that have short maturity dates, such as 25 to 30 days after planting. But then there's other lettuce varieties that will have longer maturity dates, such as 45 days. This information will be important to know when utilizing succession planting, which is something we will discuss in a little bit. Information from the publication by Carol Dowling that you see here on the slide. Karen is a master gardener from the University of New Hampshire Extension. This is where the information came from. She discusses both warm season and cool season vegetable planting dates. Today, we're talking about the timing of some basic spring crops and the best time to start your seeds. Basically, you need to know the last frost date for your area, and then, using a calendar, mark the date and count backwards on the number of weeks the seed takes from the planting date. So this will be the date of when you will start your seeds. Now, what you see on the slide here, there are some that will have a short harvest season, but you can prolong them, that are marked with an S, but you can prolong the season through succession planting. Teas are the ones that are generally should be started by seeds indoors, such as the cabbage and the cauliflower. And you're going to set these out as transplants. And the reason for this is because if you try and plant these by seeds, either it takes too long for them to germinate, or they don't do very well by seeding, and they do better if you are able to start them, get them off to a good start before you plant them directly into the garden area. Planting seeds before the soil has reached the crop's minimum temperature requirements, like 35 or 40 degrees for cool season crops, can result in seeds rotting in the soil before germination. Or the seed will germinate and then it will quickly die off. As you see in the pictures here in the lower left and the lower right, this is a good indication of what we call damping off. And it can be formed from Pythium, and it generally occurs with very damp, cool soils, which is a perfect environment when you're trying to grow your cool season crops. But it can be detrimental to the seeding and germination of your seeds there. So in order to try and reduce the potential of having this Pythium or cool damping off occurring, some growers start their seeds early, especially if you're going to be using transplants in the spring, by using a seeding heating pad. And this is going to be placed under the seedling tray to warm up the soil surrounding the seed. And this is going to allow the temperature to stay warmer around that seed until germination occurs. Once germination occurs, then the heating pad should be turned off. Temperatures can get too high. They can kill the seedling and the developing root system itself. Remember, at higher temperatures, the soil is going to dry out faster. So if you're using a heating pad, keep an eye on the seedlings to make sure that they don't dry out and it doesn't get too hot. The goal of starting seedlings indoors is to end up with a good stand of healthy plants. Placing your seedlings in a windowsill to germinate may have enough light to germinate, but when they start growing, the light level may be too low, which will result in the seedlings becoming tall and spindly, like you see in the picture. These seedlings shown are starting to grow towards the light and don't have a healthy green color. They're tall and they're leggy. Having sufficient light is important to get a healthy stand of seedlings. These are uniform in size. They have a good leaf mass to support photosynthesis, which gives the plant the energy to grow. And these plants have a nice, healthy green color. Windowsills generally will not give enough light, so you may need to incorporate grow lights just above the seedlings. It's going to be important to make sure you start with healthy seedlings when you're planting into the garden area. So as I mentioned earlier, I want to touch a little bit about succession planting and intercropping. So we talk about succession planting, we're talking about allowing you to maximize your garden space. More crops in the same area can extend the harvest window itself. You want to try with succession planting to maintain a continuous supply of the produce as long as the weather holds out. Some cool season crops will not extend into the hotter months of summer, such as lettuce and radishes. Some techniques that you have for plant succession planting is to plant one crop in different spots at different times. This picture shows a really good example of this. This was taken at the University of Illinois student farm under one of their high tunnels that they have. And as you can see, it goes from the right to the left. You see the plantings of lettuce. So they have a succession planting going of the ones on the right were planted first. And then each 2 or 3 weeks later, they plant additional rows. And as the ones on the right become depleted and are no longer edible, then they have other varieties or other types of lettuces coming in after that. You can also plant early, mid, and late ripening varieties of the same crop at the same time. Remember, I said you have some that are 25 or 30 days for lettuce or 45 days. So find some varieties that you can do that with. Having this technique will allow you to span a longer growing season and still offer consistently high quality food for your family. Other things that you can do is to plant every 1 to 2 weeks during your spring planting window. Again, this is a type of succession planting. You can also plant your transplants and seeds of the same vegetable at the same time for short harvest vegetables. The transplants will be harvested first, and when those are depleted, the seeded plants will be ready for harvest. Again, a continuation of planting for those crops. Crop rotation is a planting technique for the garden area to make sure that plants from the same family are not planted in the same area year after year. Certain plants have certain families. They all have different ways of growing and families differences on that. So continuous planting of the same family of crops will increase the potential for insect and diseases year to year. Insects and diseases, let's say for the nightshade family, which are going to be your tomatoes and peppers, potatoes, and the eggplants. These are going to be very different than the insect and diseases for the sunflower family, which is going to include your lettuces. Rotating your crops when planting in the garden area will help alleviate these pressures and can help reduce the use of pesticides in the garden area. For succession planting, using a crop rotation guide, don't plant vegetables from the same family in succession. Rotate the family of plants. Also, you can use heat-tolerant varieties in the spring to extend the season into the warmer months. Nice thing about this diagram is it gives you the differences between the families that you will see in your vegetable garden. Another example that I found online is the fruit and vegetable families, which is really nice. This is a good resource that can be used because not only does it show the vegetable like the potato or nightshade family, but it also lists the types of vegetables that are included within that family. Very nice resource. But crop rotation is going to work by changing the planting area from season to season. The picture on the left shows a small garden area. The first year you can plant fruiting vegetables such as cucumbers or peppers. The next year you may want to put crops in from the lettuce family or from the legume family, which are going to be your beans, or peas. Rotating these families from season to season is going to be important. Or if you're using succession planting, you can plant the lettuce first and then plant the cucumbers, peppers, or root crops or beans into the same growing area before harvesting the lettuce. This is called intercropping, and I will discuss this in a few minutes. But by using this intercropping crop rotation type technique, you are maximizing the amount of garden space you have by planting different crops in the same area. The picture on the right, as I said, is a good representation of the vegetable families. So with crop rotations, you're trying to keep a 2 to 3 year interval before planting crops from the same family in the same area. And this is going to help reduce the incidences of pests and diseases. When talking about intercropping, this includes growing of 2 or more crops together. Some of the advantages are using resources and lights, water, and nutrients more effectively than if one crop is grown in separate areas. It can also help to improve yields through companion planting, which is a totally different subject than what we're covering today. You can have lower pest densities, such as insects and diseases, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. The mixture of these can confuse the insects and can also help to bring in some beneficial insects, which will help reduce some of your pesticide usage. It can also allow for more effective management of cover crops or green manures if using in the home garden. Intercropping requires some additional management, such as the timing of the planting, harvesting, weather conditions, which might favor one crop over another. Intercropping can pose a problem if using crop rotations in the garden. As I mentioned before, planting crops from 2 different families in the same area may reduce the potential for having to wait between replanting of crops of the same family. But intercropping allows you to increase your produce yield on a given piece of land. Examples can be planting fast-growing spinach, which is a cool season crop, in between slow-growing rows of corn, which is a warm season crop. Deep-rooting crops such as parsnips or carrots and tomatoes can be planted in between shallow-rooted vegetables, such as the potatoes, lettuce, and broccoli. An excellent resource book for additional information on intercropping is from the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, or SARE. And I just wanted to put a picture of the book on there in case you're interested in wanting to learn some more on this subject. Additional information is also available. This is the one from ATRA, which is Sustainable Agriculture. This is a schedule of vegetable plantings for continuous harvest. It gives you the crop itself. It also talks about the amount of days that's going to be required. It's going to talk about the interval between the plantings and any comments that they have found that works best for that crop. Again, it's a table that you can start incorporating into documentation of your plantings. Another one is from Johnny's Seeds, and this is a nice one. This is a succession planting spreadsheet example. Now, the nice thing about this is that when you can enter your fall frost date, or you can enter your last spring frost date, either one, it works either way. And then once you enter into that, then you can start listing specific varieties. And the one that they have here, they've listed most of the common ones that people plant in their gardens, such as beans, cucumbers, lettuce, all these different ones. You can also put in your own. Put in the days to maturity based on the variety that you're choosing from. Again, that's going to be found on your seed packet. Interval between the succession days. How often do you want to plant? Do you want to plant every 10 days, 14 days, 21 days? And what's going to happen is that this nice computer Excel sheet is going to automatically give you or fill in those 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th planting dates for you. So all you have to do is just refer to your little thing, your little sheet here. If that's the date that you want to go out and do your succession planting, then you have those dates available. Very simple and easy. The last thing I want to talk about is going to be crop protection. So with crop protection, you want to be able to protect your crops. So sometimes when you plant them out too early, you can get a nice frost or snow depending on where you're at. So the use of row or frost covers can be beneficial to help extend the growing season, both in the spring and the fall. Row and frost covers are generally created from polyspun product that can vary in thickness. These covers can be placed directly over the crop itself, which we'll see in the next slide, or it can support it, go over the supports that hold it just over the crop, as you see in the picture in the lower right. These row covers can have a 2 to 5 degree Fahrenheit difference between the temperature under the cover or the temperature outside of the cover. This can mean the difference of saving the crop or the crop dying. Here's an example of one of those row crops that are planted. This is a commercial strawberry farm in Southern Illinois. They put that over there and they weigh it down. So these are nice row covers themselves. If you don't want to purchase a row cover, I have used in the past sheets and maybe some blankets that I have put over my crops and some of my plants in the early spring when I don't have the time to be able to get out my row covers. So they work just as well. Or you can use some sort of a plastic. Other things that you can do, actually, this is going to show what it looks like underneath. So those are the strawberry plants. When you pull off that cover, that's what they're going to look like, and they're protected from those frosts that came the night before. Other things that you can use are the cloches. You can use like a gallon milk jug or water jugs for small plants, as long as you anchor them into the soil so they don't blow away. Wood framing and plastic sheets for some of the larger plants can also be used to help reduce frost injury. Soil heaving can be a problem, especially if you have cooling and warming sessions throughout the late winter, early springtime. And so what happens when the soil heaving is that the soil pushes the plant roots out of the ground. And this happens a lot with strawberries, some of the chrysanthemums and other plants that you have in the garden. What you may want to do to help regulate that freezing and thawing process is to apply 2 to 4 inches of winter mulch, such as maybe wood chips, leaves, straw, even snow can be considered a winter mulch. And as the temperatures increase in the spring, make sure you pull back the mulch from the plant crowns so they don't stay too cool, it doesn't stay too moist, and it won't rot. So garden fabric is going to be made from the same materials as row covers, but they're thinner. These are generally used to help protect the crop from light frosts or insects. The picture on the bottom is more of a garden net. This is used to help keep the insects from laying eggs on the plants, but it doesn't work well for temperature regulation. Both the garden fabrics and row covers and garden nets can be used together to help handle temperatures and insect controls. In the picture at the bottom right, you see that they used plastic to cover the garden net. They are also able to place a plastic cover over the tunnel at night to keep the heat in and remove it during the day when the sun comes out and the temperatures rise within the tunnel itself. If you're using row covers, garden fabrics, or garden nets, make sure you anchor them to the ground so they don't blow away during high wind events. In the bottom right-hand picture, you can see that they're using sandbags, but you can also use other things such as rocks or bricks, maybe some large dirt clods from the garden, or wooden stakes. Just make sure that you're able to remove the anchors easily when needed. And so overall, we talked about soil health, spring cleaning, cool weather crops, seeding and transplants, and crop protection. You also have several resources that you can use to follow up with if you're interested, as well as contacting me directly should you have any questions at all. Some of the resources that I used for this presentation and my information should you want to contact me, and we'll put that up a little bit later. But right now, what I would like to do is to introduce Diane Langenhorst. She's an Illinois Master Gardener with us here in Bond, Clinton, Jefferson, Marion, and Washington counties. And she's going to talk to us about harvesting cool season crops. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you, Lori. That was great. And as Lori said, I'm going to talk about when and how to harvest the cool season crops. So Lori, if you can go to the next slide, the most important thing is to know your vegetables. And the more you know about the vegetable and the specific variety or cultivar that you've planted, the easier it's going to be to determine when and how to harvest. And harvesting really will depend on these 4 factors: the days to harvest, the variety or cultivar, how you're going to use them, and your personal preference. Your days to harvest can usually be found on either your seed packet or a label if you bought plants. And on this packet, it's up in the top left corner. Sometimes it's called days to maturity. Burpee uses days to harvest. And this particular loose leaf blend is 45 to 50 days. The cultivar is the variety that you use. So for leaf lettuce, the harvesting of when and how is very different than head lettuce. And how you're going to use them makes a difference. If you're using Swiss chard, you can cut it very small for using it fresh in salads, but you can use the larger leaves in stews and in sandwiches. And your personal preference also comes into play. Some people like to pick them small and tender, but you might want to pick them larger to maximize your crop yield. Next, I've divided the cool season crops into 3 groups based on how they're harvested. The first group is the root vegetables, and this includes beets, radishes, and carrots. And you'll be able to see the top of the root in most of the root crops in order to determine how big they are. And after you pull root vegetables, you should always cut off the tops, the leaves, as close to the root as possible to prevent them from drawing moisture from the root. Now, most gardeners like to pull their beets at 1.5 inches. When beets get to 3 inches or bigger, they start to get woody. Now, your beets can be grown for both the root and the top. The younger tops, when they're 4 to 6 inches, often have a mild quality, but the greens can be used until they get large and kind of strong flavored. And if you plant your beets for a fall crop, that first hard frost really improves the flavor of your beets. Now, radishes, they vary in size, shape, and color. And radish days to harvest, they can vary from 20 to 35 days. And you should pull them as soon as they get to the size that you like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And carrots, you pull them when the visible top of the root is orange and about 3/4 to 1 inch. If you're pulling to eat it raw, you might consider pulling it smaller. But if you're planning to cook the carrots, the larger ones are what you'd probably want to use. And pulling carrots is easier after a rain or watering. Next, and then we'll go on to leafy vegetables. And leafy vegetables are harvested by cutting the outer leaves. And this is based on all 4 factors. Leaf lettuce, the best time to pick them is early in the morning. There's less wilting. And you pick only the outer, the larger outside leaves, allowing the inner ones to continue to grow to extend your harvest. Now, if you want to cut the whole plant, you can. If you don't want to take the time to just take outer leaves and you've got a long row of leaf lettuce, you can cut the whole plant. But if you leave 2 inches, you can encourage new leaves. Now, Swiss chard, which is pictured here, it's a spinach-like green. It's one of my favorite vegetables. It's easy to grow, and it'll provide a harvest from spring to fall if you cut the outer leaves. And you can cut these leaves when they're 3 to 4 inches and use them in salads. The larger leaves, like if they get to 8, I've cut them even taller. They are right for cooked greens, using them in stews and pastas. Now, kale, again, you harvest the outer leaves, but when leaves of kale are picked in hot weather, they tend to be leathery. But if you planted them for a fall crop, after a good frost, it really will sweeten the kale. And kale is very winter hardy. It can be grown in the heat of the summer, but it really prefers those cool temperatures. There's a wide range of types of kale, from that alligator or lacinato kale, which is what you'd use in green smoothies, or to the very tough greens used in fish display cases, which people also use, makes great stews. But it's not to be confused with the ornamental kale. And then lastly, we're going to do head vegetables. There we go. And you cut the head of these vegetables, and you cut that entire head off. Now, you harvest cabbage heads when they're round and they're hard, and you cut that head off at a sharp angle if you're going to leave the plant to see if you get secondary heads. In this area down in Southern Illinois, it usually gets too hot and you don't get a good crop of secondary heads, but fall crops do much better. Now for broccoli, you harvest that large center broccoli head before the buds open and they start to turn yellow. They've got to be really tight and green. And you cut that stem 6 to 7 inches below the head at an angle, and you will get side shoots that develop, and then they can be harvested for an additional broccoli crop. And broccoli will continue growing until that first hard frost. Now, Lori's mentioned it already. The U of I Extension's website has a vegetable growing guide. It's got detailed information on growing all kinds of vegetables, as well as information about the different cultivars of vegetables. And with that, I'll turn it back to Lori.
Okay. So there's our contact information. If you have any questions or anything, give us a call. Gail, do you know if there's anything in the chat
I
box?
do. I have a couple. First of all, I have a question here. Can you recommend a research-based resource for selecting the appropriate intercropping plants? Some companion planting resources, there are vegetables that hinder growth of other veggie plants.
Yeah, there's a good book out there. It says Carrots Love Tomatoes, I believe it's called. But that is a really good book when you start talking about companion planting. Intercropping, you can basically, you can plant the plants, but knowing what companion plants work well with others is a good thing. There's also a lot of resources on the internet. If you go up and you put into a search engine, companion planting, garden vegetables, it should come up with some specific information. Now, if you're looking for research-based material when you're going online, in any respect, you want to be able to find websites that end in .edu. And that's telling you that this is going to be from a university-based research project or information from a reputable source. Other websites may have information in there, but I generally don't trust it. But any type of research-based material, I generally look for websites that end in .edu.
Okay, great. And then Majo is going to ask a question from her telephone, and so you can unmute Majo and ask your question.
I was wondering about cauliflower. We've grown it years ago, but haven't lately. And my heads never did get real big, just kind of medium.
Okay, and you're looking on how to increase the yield or harvest?
Harvest.
Okay. I've not grown cauliflower in my gardens. Gail or Diane, have you done that? Or Chris, have you grown
It's
that?
it's a tough variety to grow a cup, because to get a good white clean head in large size, first of all, it does need the cool weather. And then you have to kind of wrap the foliage back around the plant so that it stays bleached and white. So it's very high maintenance, but it just doesn't do well in Southern Illinois. Unfortunately, I believe it's just strictly our heat.
Oh,
Yeah, I believe you're right.
So, but that whole, anytime I see extra instructions, like start, go out there and be wrapping my plants, pulling the leaves back around. Sometimes that seems a little bit more work than I'm interested in. I've always tried, but I've never really gotten good heads from them.
Yep, I agree with that.
Yeah, Major, this is Diane. I have not tried to grow cauliflower for some of the reasons Gail talked about. It seems to take more time than others, and I'm not sure. If it's small though, could it be an issue of like your soil or nutrients? Does it need fertilizer?
well,
Yeah,
after hearing you guys, I think we did pretty good because most of ours was fairly white, but they did not get big like you see in the store. I call them kind of a medium size. So
Mhm.
maybe we did better than I thought we did.
Yeah, and the season to harvest might be long, so, we've grown Brussels sprouts in some of our community gardens, and, it seems like when it starts to get hot, they kind of just sit there. And
Mhm.
that's what happens with your cauliflower. We're just missing out on a couple extra weeks of really good warm, or good,
Yeah.
excuse me, in this case, but still yet sunny weather. So.
and if
yeah,
you
it's
have a
just-
variety that is a long-term variety, like it takes so many days, you may not have that many days of cool weather. And it may start to get warmer before it has fully developed as well. And so that will stop the process on those cool season vegetables.
Thank you so
So-
much.
Yeah, so for anybody who's on, new to gardening, really, that would not be a first variety I would grow. I'd grow things that are easier to grow. I'd go in with the broccoli and some of your leaf lettuce and whatnot. The other thing we have trouble down in our area growing sometimes is carrots, because we have such a clay soil, as Lori was talking about earlier. So the well for that. And there's a lot of varieties now of carrots that are very short and kind of a stubby carrot, and they're going to do much better than those. What we
So-
consider, at the grocery store, excuse me, I was muting that. So, yeah, so anyways. So
Okay,
any
there's
specific
there's another information as far as growing some in raised beds, and that works really well. If you have a soil that's contaminated or you feel is not the best soil, you can use a raised bed for that. Having a raised bed is going to increase the temperature of the soil within that bed a little bit higher than what you would do if you planted directly in the ground. So raised beds can also be a good bet for you. Are there any other questions from anyone?
We appreciate your time today. Lori will be sending out an evaluation, so your comments are always welcomed, and we take them very seriously to improve on our presentations and our topics.